I was reading a while back about how different animals perceive the world. I was particularly interested at that time about whales, actually, about those you know what whales are, but the fact they've got an eye on each side of their head and no sensors at the front. There's a great line in Moby Dick about how the front of a whale is like a great wall, and the whale has just darkness in front of it. But the reason why I don't know why I was looking at whales particularly, but I was quite interested at that time, and still am to a certain extent, about how the fact that animals have very different sensory apparatus and very different kind of mental apparatus for processing that sensory data must produce very different experiences and a completely different environment that they exist within. And Thomas Nagel talks about this in What Is It Like to Be a Bat? You know, he's talking about bats and the fact that they live within an auditory world of sonar, and how different that must be. But what I've been reminded of recently in relation to that was to do with sound, actually, and to do with sound and vision. I was watching this, I think it was a documentary about vision, and it was talking about how we perceive movement, and how, you know, in addition to the various, I'm not talking about the workings of the eyeball, you know, all that's fine, but the visual centres of the brain. We have visual centres which process for things like edges. We have visual centres that process for colour and for shape and for angle of inclination, so different lines at different angles are processed in slightly different portions of the brain. We have those, but we also have centres that process for motion, and so when something is unmoving, those centres of the brain go quiet, even though the rest of the visual centres keep firing. Just, you know, it's fine. I mean, that's how you detect motion, isn't it? But what it was, things that it reminded me of, was that some animals apparently don't have visual centres that process for objects that are stationary in the way that we have. That things only come into, well, I'm not sure if I can call it consciousness, but things only come into the range of their processing when they're in motion. I think some reptiles are like this. I think lizards, and I'm not quite sure which other animal. Frogs, I think I read about this. They can only see something when it's moving. So if you're stationary, you know, they literally do not see you. I don't quite know how that works really, but that's what it said. And kind of complementary to that, I read about a certain kind of neurological damage in humans, which can knock out those particular visual centres that process motion, and you live in a world in which there is no motion, which everything is stationary, but it just kind of changes suddenly. So you just get these jump cuts in your life, where instead of so if I'm turning my head like this, I wouldn't see this smooth flow of trees and bushes and nettles and paths and railway arches and things passing me like that. I would just get a series of jump cuts. So I'd see this image and it would be frozen in time, then I would see this image and it'd be frozen, and I would see this image and it'd be frozen. And it must be very difficult for those people to function in a world in which things do move. I can't imagine how you could cross the street, for example. The reason why I think this leads into this conversation about sound, which is how I started off, is to do with how you imagine a thing like that. Because this thing about living in a world of jump cuts where there is no motion, I just find it so difficult to imagine. I'm trying to kind of think my way into that way of being in the world, and it's really hard. But I was reading this morning in an old copy of Scientific American Mind from July, August, and it was about sound and it was about music. And there was one line in it which I thought was really useful, which was that all sound is a product of movement. In order to hear something has to have moved somewhere in the world. All the birds that I'm hearing around me right now, slight bangs from this garage that's over the other side of this railway embankment here that I'm walking along, and the sounds of the cars on the road up there. All those sounds are the product of movement. You know, the birds are doing things in their throats and with their beaks, and that's creating tiny little compression waves in the air, and the compression waves, the motion and the structure of the air is being transmitted to my eardrum, and is setting up motions there. Similarly with the cars, and similarly with the bangs coming from the garage. So it's all movement. But when the movement stops, the sound stops. So I've got this tree in front of me here, this bush, holly bush, quite an impressive one, and it is completely silent. It's very calm today, there's no wind. So there's no wind rustling those leaves, there's no creaking coming from the branches, it's completely silent. So effectively I'm kind of blind, aurally blind to that bush right now. If I just lived in a world of sound, that bush would be invisible. The birds would be existing and the cars would exist. There's no banging coming from the garage anymore, so that would have disappeared off the landscape of my mind completely. But all these objects around me, because it's so still, are effectively invisible, hourly invisible. I don't know what I'm going to do with that thought, but that's where I'm up to with that.